For the first time ever, the longest undefended border in the world is ostensibly closed. That's, of course, because of COVID-19. But the last few years have seen other disruptions in the relationship between the U.S. and Canada. And for Great Lakes provinces and states, that's not generally the preferred state of affairs. With us to reflect on that and what we need to consider as a new American president prepares for office, let's welcome Juan Alsace. He was U.S. Consul General in Toronto under both Presidents Obama and Trump. He's currently a consultant at Strategy Corp, and he joins us now from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the signal is a little rough, unfortunately, Mr. Former Consul General, but we will make do the best we can, and we look forward to a stimulating conversation. How are you doing tonight?
Great. Thanks very much for having me, Steve. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Not at all. Before we dive into the issues here, we should just, I think, get a little background about you on the record here, because you lived in Canada once upon a time, did you not?
I did. Actually, I was in a seminary in Niagara Falls, Ontario, studying for the priesthood when I was a teenager. So I have a long history with Canada, a lot of good friends who, I still maintain contact with from high school days.
When you saw what happened to the Canadian-American relationship over the last few years, did you have second thoughts about getting out of the seminary?
No, not at all. Actually, it turns out when I got back, when I got up to Marquette University, which was the next step, I met my wife, who's now 40 years now, and no regrets about leaving the seminary.
Okay, good. So the story has a happy ending. How did you get the Consul General gig in 2015?
Well, I'm a career Foreign Service officer and spent 32 years in the Foreign Service, and my last posting was in fact Toronto. And one of the things that I talked to my bosses about was because of that familiarity I had with with Canada, because I grew up in Buffalo, New York, it made sense for me to go there because I both knew some of the issues, I knew some of the people, and I thought that I could contribute something as Consul General in Toronto because of those close ties.
And when you got the appointment in 2015, how would you have characterized the state of relations between our two countries?
I got up there August of 2015, just as you were entering into your election. And I remember being somewhat bemused by the fact that you were saying that, or Canadians were concerned that this was a 10-week election. Were we to have that here, where our electoral cycle never ends? But you had Prime Minister Trudeau winning a surprisingly resounding victory, and so you had sort of an ideological convergence between the administration of the United States and what was going on in Canada. The Prime Minister was down in the White House very shortly after the election. You had a bit of a bromance, and so you saw that there was issues that we could work on together, certainly at the national level, because you were talking about TPP, Iran, discussions about trade. But then at the local level, which is what impacted me, we already had that sort of ideological convergence because I had a very solid working relationship with Premier Wynne right off the bat. So we were able to start working on some issues that were of common concern in Ontario. And of course, the national scenario was also quite solid. Our mission in Ottawa put together a plan to work with the new government, and we were off to the races.
Could you just amplify a bit on what those provincial, quote, American issues would have been? I understand the bigger picture nationally, but what about between Ontario and border states, for example? What would you have been working on?
Well, obviously the Great Lakes is huge. I mean, both as an economic engine for both of our countries, but also because of the issues of water. And so, consuls general will sometimes take on a pet issue, and for me, I decided to focus on the water relationship. Part of it had to do with because as a diplomat, I understood from past experience that water actually tends to bring people together. So I thought about what we could do, and so I sat down very early on with Glenn Murray, who was then the Ontario Minister for Climate Change and Environment, very passionate about water issues and climate issues generally. So we put together a brainstorming session. We brought in experts from the United States, Canada, from academia, business, NGOs, and talked about how we could work this issue. And we put together some working groups that focused on phosphorus contamination runoff into the Great Lakes, primarily agricultural runoff. But also, we also talked to a certain extent about road salt contamination and how we could get contractors to put less road salt on our roads, still maintain public safety, but reduce that amount, which is actually be 30% less of what you would normally do or what they were putting on. And then issues like bringing, and this was particularly important to me, bringing youth into the equation, because you had 17-year-olds bringing technological solutions that could be monetized and commercialized to address some of these issues. So water was a big deal. We also focused on education. Surprisingly, few Americans come up to Canada for at the university level. So we worked on issues like that. And then, of course, there was the trade issues. And some of it was not always positive. I sat down many times with Ed Clark, who was then Premier Wynn's point man on wine, to talk about American concerns about access to Ontario wine stores. We talked a little bit about issues like the Gordie Howe Bridge, and that was hopefully now been settled. But then those are the sort of issues that we talked about at the local level. And then also generally the trade issue. We had a lot of governors come up from the U.S. To lead trade delegations, talking about U.S. investment in Canada, job creation. So those are some of the issues that we talked about.
That's a very exhaustive list. And I well remember we had Steve Beshear from Kentucky in this studio talking to him about some of the issues of mutual interest. Okay, but I guess a little under a year and a half into your time on the job, the administration changed. Donald Trump became the president of the United States, and he, at least for us anyway, quite famously did not continue the tradition of making Canada the first foreign trip for an American president, which has been the case for a very, very, very long time. What signal do you think that sent to Canada that President Trump declined to make Canada his first stop?
Well, the Trump administration had focus elsewhere. But honestly, the idea that it took 7 months to name an ambassador to Canada after the Trump administration came in, I think was a significant signal about where the relationship was and the importance of Canada in at least the Trump administration's eyes. And then you had, obviously, Steve, a very contentious relationship between the president and the prime minister. At the G7 summit in Charlevoix, you had the whole issue of steel tariffs come up just before that meeting. And I know that Canadians, the idea that steel tariffs was a national security threat, Canada was a national security threat to the United States, was laughable and offensive to some of our Canadian friends. And then you had the whole issue with Trump calling the prime minister weak and dishonest as he was leaving. The fact that the minister did not go down to Washington in 2017 for the or 2018 for the USMCA implementation agreement ceremony. All those things pointed to the fact that there was, in fact, the relationship was not as close as it had been in the past.
Now, tell me how this works. You're out now, so you can really be very much more honest now, obviously, than you could have been back then. But do you go to your direct report and say, come on, we can't be calling the Canadians national security threats. That's ridiculous. It's going to ruin our relationship. Is that the kind of conversation you have?
Well, certainly, we had an ambassador in Canada who had been appointed by the president. I've had conversations like that in other posts around the world. When I was Consul General in Barcelona, when an ambassador said things that might have been offensive to Catalans. So yes, you sit there and you discuss this with your superiors. And you say to the ambassador or whoever, this is not the best language. Now, remember, of course, much of this occurred, after I departed. I departed post in August or July of 2018. So some of the things that we're talking about happened after my departure. But even in that year and a half that I was there, yeah, we had frank discussions with our colleagues and said up in Ottawa and said, these things could be problematic, and not just Canada, but obviously here in Ontario as well.
I love the diplomatic expression, full and frank conversations. Could you give us a little more hints about what those full and frank conversations were like? Was profanity used? Anybody yell at anybody? How does it actually work?
No, I think that again, I was not in Ottawa when these conversations were taking place between the president and the prime minister, or even between the ambassador and her counterparts. Fortunately, in the world of diplomacy, you don't go down to that level where you're talking to people in a derogatory manner. You do have, again, as you pointed out, frank discussions, and sometimes these lead to public spats. But generally speaking, diplomats try to keep that under control.
Okay, let's look ahead to what we presume will be the Biden era starting in January of next year. The court system will do what it does as it considers the complaints of the presumably outgoing Trump administration. But in the meantime, let's get a better understanding of what you see going forward. We have, of course, the longest undefended border in the world. We always like to pride ourselves on the fact that we haven't had a shot fired in anger at our two sides for more than 200 years. But what do you think it will take to get that border normalized again and open for passenger traffic?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, as you rightfully point out, we have had a long history of friendship together. You know, it's interesting. I on my Facebook page, I saw somebody send something to me that just as we were going through our electoral period last week, they said, we are naming Canadians an emotional support Canadian for every American if you want one. Because they understood that we were going through a very traumatic period here and that the election was, in fact, very divisive. So I think that Canadians are by nature sympathetic to what's going on in the United States and consider them, as your headline, our American cousins. So I think that sort of situation can be resolved relatively quickly because we have common values, we share common goals, common interests around the world. So I'm suspecting that because of the nature of the relationship that is so integrated on the economy, we haven't talked about the USMCA, we haven't talked about NAFTA, but all those issues are important to Canadians and Americans alike because the auto industry, which is critical in Ontario and Michigan, we want to be able to see that relationship continue to flourish and grow. You're going to have probably the most important thing that's going to happen right now is how do we deal with the pandemic response? We have seen the Trump administration not do what scientists and experts have suggested to be doing in terms of mask wearing and other kinds of things, right? You saw that throughout the entire summer and going into the fall. The president-elect and his team he's already named a COVID response team that is going to put science back in the saddle here, right? So once you've got the pandemic under control, then you can start thinking about opening the border. And it's critical that you open the border because you've got this relationship. It's $2 billion a day, U.S., that goes back and forth between the United States and goods and services, $380 billion a year between Canada and the United States, or Ontario and the United States. And that's jobs, that's tourism, that's everything you can name. And some of the issues that we talked about in terms of water, example. All these things are critical, but you got to get the pandemic response under control first, and then you can deal with these other issues. And I think that, again, our Canadian friends, and I'm in touch regularly with Canadians, both former colleagues and also friends, as I said, dating all the way back from high school, all the way to people I met when I was in Toronto. And all of them are sympathetic to the view that this relationship is strong. It's been under a lot of pressure, but it can be restored to normalcy. I mean, there will be issues. We will continue to talk about issues like softwood lumber, the dairy industries, but these are the normal disagreements between friends. And I think that we can reestablish that and just talk about these things without the sort of the language and the rancor that characterized the Trump administration's relationship with Canada.
Well, let me pursue that a little more with you, because as strange as it sounds, most Canadians, when you survey them, would vote for the Democratic Party in any presidential contest. That was certainly the case in this last election. However, Canadians tend to do better economically when Republicans are in charge. Now, mind you, not this past Republican, because Trump was not a classic Republican. And I wonder whether or not Canadians ought to be alarmed at some of the things they're hearing under Joe Biden already. For example, he's certainly talking about a Buy America First policy, which is, not necessarily what, if you're running a manufacturing business in Ontario, you'll want to hear. So what should we be concerned about on that front?
Certainly, Democrats are and the Democratic Party, and therefore President-elect Biden, are not as in favor as Republicans have been in the past, or at least in the recent past, in terms of free trade agreements and these types of things, because of concerns about, and Biden is going to have to got a significant number of his votes from labor unions, so he has to respond to that. All that said, it's a two-way street. We are concerned about protectionist tendencies in some issues in Canada. I mentioned dairy, I mentioned softwood lumber, I mentioned a couple of other things as well. So it's a two-way street that we need to. But the important thing, Steve, is that we can sit down and discuss this as adults now, and to have a serious conversation about how to do this. And going back to Ontario, I know that Premier Ford, who is not ideologically on the same page as the Biden administration, he's made significant efforts to put together a strategic plan that would focus on trade with U.S. states, in particular on issues of procurement. And so he's put that forward, and he's done a good job, as I understand it, from friends on the pandemic response. So we can work together on that. So I think there's a lot of areas that we can work together, which is what the relationship has normally been like over the years, and without the rancor and the silliness that you have seen sometimes from the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's an interesting little wrinkle here in the relationship between the president-elect and the current Prime Minister of Canada, and that is Justin is not Joe's first Trudeau. Can you talk about the fact that Joe Biden has had dealings with Pierre Trudeau in the past?
Yeah, and before we got to that, obviously, just as I was close to my departure, 2016, after the surprise election of November of 2016, Prime Minister Trudeau hosted the Vice President in Ottawa, December 2016, as a farewell. So they already have that relationship. But the thing that you point out to is very important as well. And again, reflects on the nature of the family relationship between the United States and Canada. Pierre Trudeau, we all know the very sad story of the death of President-elect Biden's first wife and his two daughters. And Pierre Trudeau called him to offer his condolences. And that's the kind of thing that Joe Biden doesn't forget, right? Because he's a very people person. So I think on that grounds alone, you're going to see a change in the relationship, because there's that family tie that you see between us.
Now, all of that notwithstanding, when Canada says to Joe Biden, we really would love to get that Keystone XL pipeline built, and the president-elect's position, presumably he'll be the president at this point, his position is, well, my party's officially against that. Are we back to where we were 4 years ago?
Well, it's hard to hypothesize, but remember the Keystone pipeline issue is contentious on both sides of the border. There are people who will argue that the tar sands that are going to be supplying this oil are not environmentally good either for Canada or for the United States. So again, we'll have a conversation about this, but it'll be a conversation that is professional, that is fact-based, and then we will come to a decision based on our own national interests. We do have disagreements, and Canada will push this forward. And states will say yes or no, depending on how certain circumstances play out. But again, it's an issue that, like all these other issues, that we can discuss. That's
true. Do you think the Trump tariffs and the labeling Canada a national security threat, do you think those days are gone?
Oh, I certainly hope so. Again, I as an American, and again, my political sympathies are I think are fairly clear. I was offended by the idea that the country that to me had been a neighbor. I went to high school there. I lived in Buffalo, New York. I crossed the Peace Bridge I don't know how many countless times. That Canada could be seen as a national security threat to the United States after we had fought together in World War I and World War II, had been a convergence of interest and trade and everything else over the course of the years, that could somehow come forward. Yeah, Canadians were rightfully offended by that. I'm confident that kind of thing will not happen again under a Biden administration.
Because I'm sure you've heard the running joke, which has been over the last 4 years, being a Canadian is like living in a nice apartment on top of a meth lab. You have no doubt that that's not going to be the case anymore?
I watched Breaking Bad and like many of us, and I don't think that's going to be the case. Again, we will have our disagreements, Steve. But the people that I speak to in Canada right now, including up in Toronto, professionals across all stripes, are very. They're happy about what happened. Going back to 2016, I remember that our council had hosted an election party the evening of 2016. We had 400 guests come through that night, including the Premier Wynne, Mayor Tory, others as well. And we were very excited about what was going to happen. And then around 9:30, the air just went out of the room, right? Because we saw what was going on. That kind of thing reflects Canadian views of American politics and this administration, it's not going to happen again.
Well, let me just in conclusion here ask you one last question, which I don't know, I've always found this interesting. Most Americans I talk to seem to think Canadians and Americans are very, very similar. And most Canadians I talk to seem to think we're very different from you guys. Where do you come down on that?
It's a question I was asked actually when I was there. And I think that probably the principal difference between the U.S. and Canada is that Canadians are actually much more, in some respects, risk averse. You will see that in areas like technology, startups, those sorts of things. And I think, and I'm not just the one saying this. I've also heard this from other colleagues around the world, including for example, the Israeli CG when I was in Canada. So I think that's where you see some differences. I think in terms of culture and social issues, we're pretty much on the same page. But I guess that's probably the biggest difference I see. Americans will take a chance more often than Canadians.
Well, I should conclude by saying to a guy from Buffalo, New York, good luck to your Bills this year. They're off to a really good start. And maybe one day they'll be known for actually winning a Super Bowl rather than losing 4 in a row. So good luck on that.
I always tell people, I tell my friend, you can make fun of Buffalo, but you can't say that to me.
Good enough. That's Juan Alsace, the former Consul General from the United States to Toronto. It's great to have you on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Steve. Glad to be on your show.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.